Hey everyone, my name's Chad. This is the part 2 video for Cloudblock, a project I wrote. This is specific to Scaleway deployment. Scaleway is a cloud provider based in Europe. You should have gone through the prerequisite video already, or prerequisite guide, and have a Scaleway account. I'm at the GitHub page and I'll go to the Scaleway folder and then scroll down to the instructions specific to Scaleway. We'll need to install the Scaleway CLI and generate some authentication tokens. I'll open Windows Subsystem Linux and go to my home directory. We can install the Scaleway CLI with these two commands. I'll copy these. Actually, let's copy one at a time. The first one's going to prompt us for our password. That's the password we set up in the previous video. And then we need to make it executable. We generate an API key at this URL, so you should already be logged into your Scaleway account or log in if you haven't. And I'm going to add a new API key. We'll call this Cloudblock. So it's got a warning here. This is a secret. It will only be shown once, and we need to save it. So keep this page up and don't share it. I'm going to delete this key once we're done. Let's go back to the instructions. We add the key when prompted. So I'll copy this command, paste it in. We enter a valid secret key. So I'll go back and there's the secret key. No, I'm not sending back usage statistics. Do we want autocomplete? Yeah, that's fine. It may take an extra second. We're using bash. I'll hit enter. And do we want to proceed with these changes? Yes, I'll just hit enter again. We found an SSH key. That is the key that we set up in the previous. That's fine. Initialization complete. We are good to go with that step. Let's customize our deployment. This is where we'll customize Cloudblock, tailor it to our needs. We need to go to the Scaleway specific Cloudblock folder. And then we go to the same path or the same folder in Windows File Explorer. So copy that address and open Windows File Explorer. Paste it into the address bar. And then if you'll notice here, it may be a little difficult to see, my name is in there, Chad. That's my Windows Subsystem Linux username. If you don't know your username, you can get it with who am I. And there we go. So paste it in, but replace Chad with your username. We'll edit the file scw.tfvars, double click it. It may prompt you, if you haven't edited this type of file before, it may prompt you for an application to open it in. Notepad is fine. I've already done that. And we can scroll down to the variables section to go through these. The first one, ph_password. This is the password to access the Pi-hole web UI. Make it something unique, secure, and safe. I will set mine to something simple, change me 1A. The SSH key, again, that's the key that we generated in the previous video. You can get it with that command, and then to copy from PowerShell, you highlight and right click. Paste it between the quotes. Next is management CIDR. This does a couple things. This is your IP range, or IP address, that's granted web UI access to the Pi-hole and SSH access. It's also, there's a setting further down. It's also permitted access to talk to the Pi-hole directly for DNS lookups without using WireGuard. So that can be kind of handy. If your IP address doesn't change very often, or doesn't change at all, you could set your router, your home router, to this DNS or this IP address. We'll get one back once we're done, and I'll show it. You could set your router's DNS to your Scaleway server's IP address and get DNS that way without using a WireGuard, which is kind of nice. And then, so I'll set mine. We do need to set it for now. And you could go to Google and type in what is my IP. And there's mine. You replace everything before the slash. Slash 32 is a notation for a single IP address in IPv4. Next, what do we have? The Scaleway access key and secret. So let's go back, and we need that This is how we store files in the Scaleway cloud. Next, so those are all the things you must change, but there are some more that are fairly important. So let's go through those. WireGuard peers. This is the number of peer configurations or VPN configurations to generate, one per device. So if you had a phone, a tablet, and a laptop, you would need at least 3 peer configurations. The default is 20, that's fine, especially for one person. If you're sharing this, you certainly may need more. And my suggestion would be to generate more than you need. The upper limit is somewhere around 200 and 250. I'll leave it as 20 for now. That's fine for me. And we also have our DNS over HTTPS provider. So Pi-hole blocks add domains. If it like doubleclick.net is a advertiser on the internet, and it will block anything. Like if you go to a web page and doubleclick.net is somewhere on that web page trying to serve an ad, that domain is blocked. It won't ever load. But the rest of the page, you do need proper DNS lookups. Where do those go? So Pi-hole will block the bad ones, but Pi-hole needs to send non-blocked DNS requests out to the internet. This is where you're choosing which DNS provider to use. And if we look at the diagram, we can see that. So I'll scroll up here. So we've got Pi-hole ad block filter, this box in the middle, and it goes to Cloudflare DNS over HTTPS. This encrypts the DNS lookup to a DNS over HTTPS provider. And you could pick one. There's a list here. Do some research. Maybe one that works for you in your location, wherever you are in the world, or has features that you're interested in. Not all of them are the same, but for basic DNS lookups, just getting the response that your machine needs, you could probably choose any, but do some research. It's a good idea to do so. I'll leave mine as OpenDNS. That works fine for me. Next, we have VPN traffic. It is set to DNS by default. So when you're connected to WireGuard and you have your phone, you're out and about and you have your phone with WireGuard installed and you turn it on, only your DNS lookups by default will go through the VPN that gets you the ad blocking. You could, if you want to, and so to keep going with that, if you have it set to only DNS and you were to watch Netflix, your Netflix traffic watching Netflix is not going through the VPN service. It's going through your normal internet service provider directly to Netflix. If you wanted all of your traffic to go through your Scaleway server, you could change this to all. And that would put all traffic through. Now keep in mind, I don't think Scaleway charges for bandwidth, but there might be some latency concerns or throughput concerns. So that's one thing to note. And then the third option is peers. And this would allow, so let's say you have 2 devices connected to WireGuard. You have a desktop sitting at home and you've got your laptop with you and you're out, you're traveling. If you had WireGuard turned on both and this was set to peers, you could have your laptop talk to your desktop at home through the WireGuard VPN. So that's the third option if you wanted. Now keep in mind, all of these are just configuration defaults. You can change them after the fact. It just makes it easier for the initial setup. There's no restriction. We're not locking this down. And I put this in a note here. Does not restrict clients. Clients can change their setting as desired. It's called allowed IPs. And you'll see that if you download the WireGuard client, whether it's Windows, Mac, Linux, iPhone, Android, etc., you can see where this setting is being set. This is just the default once it's built. And I'll leave mine as DNS for now. That's all I really care about is the ad blocking. Next, we have DNS no VPN. So I mentioned earlier that this IP address, management CIDR, we get the web UI access, right? We can get to the web UI for Pi-hole. It allows SSH to the server. And then if this is set to 1, which is the default, we can also talk to the Pi-hole directly without WireGuard. So I'm going to leave that as well. I'm interested in that. And I might be setting up my router at home to point to the Scaleway server that I build, that gets built. And this would allow me to talk to it for DNS without using WireGuard. And then when I'm traveling, well, maybe I'm on my cell phone out in public, I would have WireGuard turned on. Next, we have client CIDRs. This is where you could set additional IP addresses. So maybe you have a second internet connection for a home office, or you've got a friend that wants to use the service as well, you could define additional IP addresses here, and it would allow them to talk, just like your management cider, it would allow them to query the Pi-hole directly. All right, now we get into the Scaleway specific things. The region. We need to do a couple things. One, you need to have a verified Scaleway account. If you set up Scaleway, not everything is enabled. You have to validate some things in order to create the service. You don't need the top tier validation where I think you validate your identity, but you do need to at least validate billing. So keep that in mind. But we need to make sure that the region that we're choosing has the instance type that we're looking for. So there's a URL here, and I'll go to this. And it looks like I've chosen Amsterdam as my default. So let me click on Amsterdam just to make sure. And the size that I'm building is the smallest size, which is called Stardust. This is a small image. It's the cheapest image that Scaleway offers. So if I scroll down here, we can see Stardust is temporarily out of stock in Amsterdam. So let me go to Paris, and we'll check there as well, temporarily out of stock. But if we choose Paris 2, none available. Let's try Warsaw. None available. Okay. Well, that concludes this video for now. It looks like those are completely out of stock. About a week ago, these were all fine. Let's try need quotas. Let's see. Paris 1. Need quotas. Development. Okay, here we go. So Stardust, how much is that? 0.0025. Okay, this is a little bit more expensive, but we can at least try it. All right, so we'll keep going. I would suggest using Stardust 1 if it's available. That is the cheapest. I'm sure they are generally available. Let me go back to Amsterdam and check. Yeah, okay, we can use Amsterdam Region 1. The image is Ubuntu Bionic. That is Ubuntu 18.04, which was released in April, or the 4th month of 2018. You could use, what is the newer one? 2004, I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But this is fine. It's supported for several more years. It's still a very common and probably the most common type of operating system to use. So I'm going to stick with this. Okay, so size is different. We can't use Stardust, right? It's out of stock. So let me go to development. This is like the next smallest instance type, dev1-s. I'm going to change it, dev1-s. All right, all the Scaleway settings are good. This is a prefix. This is like a label that gets applied to things like the server name, the name of a bucket that we're going to store data in. What else? There's just a few things that get this label applied to them in the Scaleway cloud. You could change this if you wanted. Just make it a little bit shorter, or keep it this length or shorter. Keep it short. The project URL, that's the GitHub project URL. If you were to fork or otherwise host your own version of this project, you could change the setting here. And then the Scaleway CIDR. This is the network that's created in the Scaleway cloud. You would really only need to change this if you have, say, a home network or other Scaleway services running, maybe a lab running that this might overlap with. It might be good to change it. I'm going to change mine. I've already got services running in Scaleway, so I'm going to set mine to .20. And then we've got a few more IP addresses here. These are all specific to the service that's running on the server. So VPN CIDR, this is open worldwide. This is like a firewall rule. This allows you to connect to the WireGuard server from anywhere, from any IP address. And that's okay. We have authentication built in. That's what we'd want. You could change it though if you needed. My suggestion would be you're probably going to want to connect from anywhere or any IP address. You do have authentication enabled with a VPN. It's safe to set it this way. And then we have Docker network and these IP addresses. These are all fine as defaults. Just keep in mind that they exist and what they are if you're going to do additional work on the server you build. And then the WireGuard network as well. That's the network that's used when you're connected to the VPN. It's a /24. Change this if it would overlap anything that you already have. Okay, and that's everything. So I'm going to save this file, close it out, and go back to my instructions. Make sure you're in the Scaleway directory. And then we run Terraform init. This will tell Terraform to download any Scaleway specific code that it needs. This should be pretty quick. And any other code as well, things like a random number generator. And then we run the real magic of Terraform, which is Terraform apply. This will take the code included with Cloudblock, the GitHub code, and our customized vars file that we just set up. And it will build a plan to build resources in the Scaleway cloud. And we can see that plan here, things like the backup bucket. This is where the WireGuard VPN configurations will sit. This is where backups for Pi-hole will sit. There's an automated backup process that runs every 12 hours if you customize your Pi-hole service. The instance, which is the server itself, firewall rules, things like that. So you can scroll up and see all those. I'll type in yes, and Terraform will begin building all of those resources in the Scaleway cloud. This should be pretty quick, but it may take a little bit. It depends entirely on how long it takes Scaleway to build all of those resources that Terraform tells it to. I'll be back when it's done. Things to note, we will get, there we go. We get some green output at the end. When you run that command, if you get an error message about permission denied, there's a fix for that. I don't get that error message, but I've had a few folks tell me about it. This will fix that for you. And it seems to be something related to how Windows Subsystem Linux works on Windows. So run that if you get a permission denied message, and then rerun the Terraform apply command. So we've got our output in green. That means everything is done with the Terraform side, but we still need to, and you'll notice here, Terraform outputs to install commands. We use that to start the Ansible installation. All right, and if I scroll up, I want to explain that a little bit. We've got Terraform building all of the resources in Scaleway Cloud. We use Ansible to configure the instance. So Terraform built the instance, the bucket, the firewall rules, that kind of thing. Ansible will set up Docker with the WireGuard VPN container, Pi-hole, DNS over HTTPS, all of those things. We need to initialize that. Scaleway doesn't have a great way yet to automate that part. So I'll scroll back down. Let's look at the notes. It outputs 2 install commands. And if I scroll up, we'll see those install commands. Let me copy this one. Now, our server is still booting up, and this just finished, right? Terraform just output, so the server could still be booting. Let's try this and see what happens. It looks like it's ready to go. Okay. You might get a message stating permission denied or unable to connect, timeout. Just give it a moment. Allow the server to fully boot, the Scaleway server. So I'll type in yes. This is the first time we're connecting. And the file transfer completed. And then we execute the installation script. All right, and the installation has started. If I scroll back up, one other thing to note, this Terraform output might be worthwhile to copy this into Notepad and save it for reference. It has things like how to SSH to the server, the web UI once Pi-hole is up and running, notes on updates, notes on destroying the service if you're done. Might want to keep a copy of that safe and secure somewhere. If you don't save it and you need to get back to it, you can, as long as you're in the directory, this directory here, you can type in Terraform output and the same thing will pop up. It's not in green, but it's there if you need it. So what's next? If you want to watch Ansible set up the virtual machine, you can SSH to the instance and then tail this file. So let's do that. I'll SSH to the server here. It's a good way to do it. And then let's copy this command. This log file might not exist yet. It doesn't for me. That's just because Ansible is still being installed itself. That's part of that installation script. Once Ansible's installed, we'll start seeing log messages appear, and we'll wait for what's called a play recap at the very end to tell us that everything is done. So I'll be back for that. Give it just a moment. Okay, we have the play recap. And the most important bit is that failed equals 0. That means everything is done. There were no issues encountered, and we are good to go. All of our services are up and running. And we can see that. I'll Control-C out. and run sudo docker ps. That'll give me a list of all the Docker containers running, and there are 4. We can see them. We've got HTTPD, the web, which is the web proxy. We've got WireGuard, our VPN. We've got Pi-hole, and our Cloudflare DNS over HTTPS service. I'll exit out and run Terraform output again. Let's scroll up. So we're done with the installation. Let's look at the web UI. This is the web UI for the Pi-hole. I'll open a new tab. Your connection isn't private. That's okay. That's because we're using a self-signed certificate. You'll need to hit continue. Your connection is still encrypted. It's still secure. This is actually what we want. And I will turn off Dark Reader. I'll log in. That's the password I set in the variables file, change me 1A. And you could, at this point, customize your Pi-hole service as you'd like. The one thing I'll note, though, is under settings and then DNS are the upstream DNS servers. This is the same IP address, keep in mind, but labeled here twice. This is the Cloudflare DNS over HTTPS container. This is how our DNS lookups become encrypted. So if you were to change this, you may lose encrypted DNS lookups. Keep that in mind. But everything else, feel free to make changes to. We also have, if I scroll back up, our VPN files. This is, if you notice, a Scaleway URL. And you'll need to be logged into Scaleway, or it may prompt you if you're not logged in. But this is where we'll get the VPN configurations for all of our clients. So our laptop, our desktop, phone, etc. And you'll see here there are several folders. I had 20 peers. And if I go to peer 1, we have 4 files listed. You'll most likely be interested in .conf and .png. .conf is a text-based configuration file. That's good for Windows, Mac, Linux. And then the PNG, and I'll show that, is a QR code. And if you have the Scaleway, if you have the WireGuard app installed on your phone, Android or iPhone, or a tablet, it's free. There's an option to add the VPN via QR code. It'll open the camera, you point it at the QR code, and it will install the WireGuard configuration for your deployment. It's kind of nice, kind of handy. With that said, there are 20 peer configurations in my deployment, and you may have more or less. Make sure that you note which one goes with which device. So if I set up peer 1 on my phone, I'd want to do peer 2 for my laptop, peer 3 for my tablet, etc. And keep track of those. If you were to have the same peer assigned to 2 different devices, likely what will happen is only one will work if the VPN is active on both at the same time. So maybe just like you need to keep an output of, if you need to keep a copy of your Terraform output, also keep a list of which peer configurations you assign to which devices. That about wraps it up for Pi-hole and WireGuard. I want to talk about updates real quick. It's very straightforward. So my suggestion would be at least every 2 months or so to run the updates. That might mean that there's a WireGuard update. They fixed a bug. Same with the Pi-hole, they might have fixed a bug, or there's a security update, or there's a new feature that you're interested in. It's very straightforward. So we'll look at the update instructions. We get them in Terraform output. The first step is to SSH to the server. And then the next step is to remove the containers. The services are down until Ansible completes, right? So keep that in mind. Services will be down after you run this command, just temporarily. And then we rerun the Ansible state. We do that with this command. And you could watch with the same tail command that we had earlier. You could watch, you'll see it in a moment here. There it goes. So it'll start going through the steps again, and it will have the latest version of Pi-hole, WireGuard, and also the other 2 containers, the DNS over HTTPS container and the web proxy. So give it a little bit of time to run, and then things will be back up and running. Pretty straightforward. If you're I should mention, if you're familiar with Pi-holes, if you've run a Pi-hole before and you didn't use the Docker method, it is different. Don't run, they specifically state, Pi-hole developers specifically say, don't run the Pi-hole -up or update command, if you're running a Docker installation, that they have a different method, and this uses that different method. So keep that in mind. You can Control C. You don't have to watch this. And then the final thing I want to show is Terraform output here, and then destroy. So if you're done with the project, and I am, you can destroy everything with Terraform. There is a step beforehand where you need to delete all the objects that are in this bucket. So keep that in mind. And I'll go through that. So you need to have the AWS CLI installed. We use the AWS CLI because Scaleway uses what's called the S3 API, which is something that Amazon or AWS created, and it's how they talk to objects that are stored in buckets. And you can install it with these two commands, run them individually. I've already done it. I don't need to. You may be prompted. There's a sudo command in there, so you may be prompted for your sudo password. And then you can run all three of these commands. And I'll run all three. This will remove all of the objects in the bucket, and you can see that happening here. If I scroll back up, we then run Terraform destroy. It'll give a verification prompt. Do I want to really destroy all resources? I'll say yes. And that will destroy everything in Scaleway. That about wraps it up, everyone. If you have questions, comments, ideas, concerns, the best way to reach me is through Discord. And there's a link to that on the GitHub page and in this video description. You could certainly open a GitHub issue, or if you have a feature update that you're interested in pushing, you could open a pull request, or a bug fix, you could open a pull request for that as well. But the best way is Discord. I'm there. If you have questions, concerns, comments, there's a lot of folks already there as well. We would be more than happy to have you. Thank you, and take care.